Some Letters of St. Bernard, Part 4. Letter 20, circa A.D. 1130. To Guy, Abbot of Molemzis. Bernard consoles him under a great injustice which he had suffered, and recommends him to temper his vengeance with mercy. God, who knows all the hearts of men, and is the inspirer of all good dispositions, but with what sympathy I condole you in this your adversity, of which I have heard. But, again, when I consider rather the person who has caused you this trial than him who permits it, just as much as I feel with you in the present misfortune, so much I soon hope to rejoice with you in the prosperity which must come speedily. But only do not let yourself be at all crushed by discouragement. Think with me how, by the example of holy Job, you ought to receive, and the same cheerfulness, troubles from the hands of the Lord as you do blessings. Indeed, you ought, after the example of holy David, not so much be angry with these people who have caused you such great sufferings, though they are your own servants, as to know that you ought to humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, who doubtless has sent them about this misfortune to you. But since it appears that their correction devolves upon you, as they are serfs of the church committed to your government, it is proper that the unfaithful serfs should be punished for their very wicked presumption, and the loss of the monastery should be recompensed in some degree out of their goods. But that you may not seem rather to be avenging your own injury in this than punishing their fault, I beg you also to advise you not to think so much of what they deserve as what is fitting for you to do, so that the mercy may be exalted above strict justice, and that in your moderation God may be glorified. For the rest, I beg you to press upon that your son, who is dear to me, as well as for your sake, as in a great degree for his own, with your own lips, as with my spirit, not to show his accusations of bitterness and violence, such as prove that he forgets the precept of the Lord. Whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek shall turn him also the other. St. Matthew 5:39. Letter 21, circa A.D. 1128. To the Abbot of St. John at Chartres. Bernard dissuades him from resigning his charge and undertaking a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. As regards the matter about which you were so good as to consult so humble a person as myself, I had at first determined not to reply, not because I had any doubt what to say, but because it seems to me unnecessary or even presumptuous to give counsel to a man of sense and wisdom. But considering that it happens that the greater number of persons of sense, or I might say that all such, trust the judgment of another person rather than their own in doubtful cases, and that those who have a clear judgment in the affairs of others, however obscure, frequently hesitate and are undecided about their own, I depart from my first resolution, not, I hope, without reason, and without prejudice to any wiser opinion, explain to you simply how the matter appears to me. You have signified to me, if I do not mistake, by the pious Abbot Ursus of St. Denis, that you have it in contemplation to desert your country and the monastery over which, by providence of God, you are the head, and undertake a privilege to Jerusalem, to occupy yourself henceforth only with God and the salvation of your soul. Perhaps if you aspire into perfection, it may be expedient for you to leave your country. When God says, "Go forth from my country and from the kindred," Genesis 12:1. But I do not see at all on what ground you ought to risk, by your departure, the safety of the souls entrusted to you. For it is pleasant to enjoy liberty after having laid down your burden. But charity does not seek her own interests. Perhaps the wish for quiet and rest attracts you, but it is obtained at the price of the peace of others. Freely will I do without the enjoyment of any desire, even a spiritual one, which cannot be obtained except at the price of a scandal. For there is scandal, there, without doubt, is a loss of charity. And where there is loss of charity, surely no spiritual advantage can be hoped for. Finally, if it is permitted to anyone to prefer his own quiet to the common good, who is there that can say with truth, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain"? Philippians 1:21. And where will the principle be which the apostle declares, "No one lives to himself, and no one dies to himself"? Romans 14:7. And not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many. 1 Corinthians 10:33. And that he should live not any longer than live unto himself, but unto him who died for all. 2 Corinthians 5:15. But you will say, "Whence comes my great desire, if it is not from God?" With your permission, I will say what I think. Stolen waters are sweet. Providence 9:17. And for whosoever knows the devices of the devil, it is not possible that the angel of darkness is able to change himself into an angel of light, and to pour upon the thirsting soul those waters which the sweetness is more bitter than wormwood. In truth, what can be the suggester of scandals, the author of dissension, the troubler of unity and peace, except the devil, the adversary of truth, the envier of charity, the ancient foe of the human race, and the enemy of the cross of Christ? If death entered into the world through his envy, even now so he is jealous of whatever good he sees you doing. Since he is a liar from the beginning, he falsely promises now better things which he does not see. For when did the truth oppose that most faithful saying, "Thou art bound unto a wife, seek not to be loosed"? 1 Corinthians 8:27. Or did charity urge to scandal, and who the scandals for all shows herself burning with regret? He then, the most wicked one, opposed by charity, by envy, and to truth by falsehood, mixing falsehood and gall with the true honey, promises doubtful things as certain, and gives out the true things are false, not that he may give you what you vainly hope for, but that he may take away what you are profitably holding now. He prowls around and seeks how he may take away from the flock the care of the pastor, to make a prey of it, and when there is none to defend it from his attacks, besides this, to bring down upon the pastor that terrible rebuke, Woe to him by whom scandal cometh. St. Matthew 18:7. But I have full confidence in the wisdom given to you by God, that by no cunning devices of the wicked one you will be seduced, or made to renounce certain good, for the hope of uncertain advantage to incur certain evil. Letter 22, circa A.D. 1129. To Simon, Abbot of St. Nicholas. Bernard consoles him under the persecution of which he is the object. The most pious endeavors do not always have their desired success. What line of conduct ought to be followed towards his inferiors by a prelate who is desirous of stricter discipline? I have learned with much pain by your letter the persecution you are enduring for the sake of righteousness, and although the consolation given to you by Christ is the promise of his kingdom, may suffice amply for you, none the less it is my duty to render you both all the consolation that is in my power, and sound and faithful advice as far as I am able. For who can see without anxiety Peter stretching his arms in the midst of the billows? Or hear without grief the dove of Christ not singing, but groaning as if she said, How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Who, I say, can without tears look upon the tears of Christ himself, who from the bottom of the abyss now lifts his eyes unto the hills to see whence come his help? But we, to whom in your humility you say that you are looking, are not mountains of help, but are ourselves struggling with laborious endeavors in this vale of tears against the snares of a resisting enemy, and the violence of worldly malice, and with you we cry out, Our help is from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. Psalms 121:2. All those, indeed, who wish to live piously in Christ after persecution, 2 Timothy 3:12. The intention to live piously is never wanting to them, but it is not always possible to carry it out perfectly. For just as the mark of the wicked constantly to struggle against the pious designs of the good, so it is not a reproach to the piety of the latter, even though they are frequently unable to perfect their just and holy desires, because they are few against many opposers. Thus, Aaron yielded against his will the impious clamors of the riotous people. Exodus 32. So Samuel unwillingly anointed Saul, constrained by the too eager desires of the same people for a king. 1 Samuel 10. So David, when he wished to build a temple, yet because of the numerous wars which that valorous man had constantly to sustain against enemies who molested him, he was forbidden to do what he piously proposed. 2 Samuel 8. Similarly, Venerable Father, I counsel you, without prejudice to the better advice of wiser persons, so to soften, for the present only, the rigor of your purpose of reform, and that of those who share it with you, that you may not be unmindful of the salvation of the weaker brethren. Those, indeed, over whom you have consented to preside in that order of Cluny ought to be invited to a stricter life, but they ought not to be obliged to embrace it against their will. I believe that those who do desire to live more strictly ought to be persuaded either to bear with the weaker out of charity, as far as they can without sin, or permitted to preserve the customs which they desire in the monastery itself. If that may be done without scandal to either party, or at least that they should be set free from the order to associate themselves where it may seem good with other brothers who live according to their proposal. Letter 23, circa A.D. 1130, to the same. Bernard sends back to him to be severely reprimanded a fugitive monk. He persuades William, who was meditating a change of state or retiring into private life, to persevere. To his friend, Brother Bernard of Clairvaux, all that a friend can wish for a friend. You have given me this formula of salutation when you wrote, "To his friend all that a friend can wish. Receive what is thine own, and perceive that is the assumption of it as a proof that we are of one mind. For my heart is not distant from him who I have language in common. I must now reply briefly to your letter, because of the time, for when it arrived at the festival of our Nativity of the Lady has dawned, and being obliged to devote myself entirely to its solemnities, I had no leisure to think of anything else. Your messenger was also anxious to be gone. Scarcely would he stay even until tomorrow morning, that I might write to you these words after all the offices of the festival. I send back to you a fugitive brother after having subjected him to severe reprimand suited to his hard heart. It seemed to me that there was nothing better to do than to send him back to the place whence he had fled, since I ought not, according to our rules, to detain any monk in the house without consent of his abbot. You ought to reprove him very severely also, and press him to make a humble satisfaction, and then comfort him a little by a letter from yourself addressed to the abbot on his behalf. Concerning my state of health, I am not able to reply very precisely to your inquiry, except that I continue, as in the past, to be weak and ailing, neither much better nor much worse. If I had not sent the person whom I had thought of sending, it is only because I feel much more the scandal to many souls than the danger of one body. Not to pass over any of the matters of which you speak to me, I come to yourself. You wrote that you wish to know what I desire you to do, as if I were aware of all that concerned you. But this plan, if I should say what I think, is one that neither I nor counsel nor you to carry out. I wish, indeed, for you what, as long as I have known, your wish for yourself, but putting on one side, as is right, both your will and mine, to think of what God wills for you, and, to my mind, it is both safer for me to advise you to that, and much more advantageous for you to do it. My advice is, then, that you continue to hold your present charge, to remain where you are, and to study to profit over whom you are set, nor flee from the cares of office until you are able to be of use. Because woe to you if you are over the flock and do not profit them, but deeper woe still if, because you fear the cares of office, you abandon the opportunity of usefulness. Letter 24, circa A.D. 1126. To Oger, regular canon. Bernard blames him for his resignation of his pastoral charge, although made from the love of a calm and pious life. Nonetheless, he instructs him now, after becoming a private person, though he ought to live in community. To Brother Oger, the canon, Brother Bernard, monk but sinner, wishes that he may walk worthily of God even to the end, and embrace him with the fullest affection. If I seem to have been too slow in replying to your letter, ascribed it to my not having had an opportunity to send to you, for what you now read was long since, but, as I have said, although written without delay, was delayed for want of a bearer. I have read in your letter that you have laid down with regret the burden of your pastoral charge, permission having been obtained with great difficulty, or rather extorted by your importunity from your bishop, only on the condition that you should remain under his authority, although fixing yourself elsewhere. But this not being satisfactory to you, you appealed to the archbishop, obtaining the relaxation of this condition. You have returned to your former house and put yourself under your original abbot. Now you ask to be advised by me to how you ought to live henceforth? An able teacher indeed, and incomparable master am I. And when I shall have begun to teach what I do not know myself, it will soon be discovered that I know nothing. You act, in consulting me, as a sheep who seeks wool from a goat, a mill expecting water from an oven, a wise man expecting sound counsel from a fool. Beside this, you heap upon me, from one end of your letter to another, complimentary speeches, and attribute to me excellences of which I am not conscious. And as I ascribe them to your kind feelings, so I forgive them in your ignorance. For you look upon the countenance, but God upon the heart, and if I examine myself with attention under his awful gaze, I find that I know myself much better than you know me, since I am much less far from myself than you are. Therefore I give greater credence to that which I see in myself than to what you suppose, without seeing, to be in me. Nevertheless, you may have learned from me anything that is profitable to you. Give thanks to God, in whose hand I am and all my works. You explain to me also for what reason you have not followed my advice, not only not to allow yourself to be discouraged or overcome by despondency, but to bear patiently in the burden paid upon you, which, once undertaken, you are not at liberty to lay down, and I accept your explanations. I am well aware, indeed, of the infertility of my wisdom, and I always hold myself in suspicion for rashness and inexperience, so that I ought not to take it ill, nor do I, when the course which happens is not taken, and I wish, on the contrary, that action should be taken on better advice than mine. As often as my opinion is chosen and followed, I feel myself weighted down. I confess it with responsibility and await with inquietude, never with confidence, the issue of this matter. And yet it is for you to see if you have acted wisely in not following my advice about this thing. But it must be decided also by those wiser persons than I, on whose authority you have relied, whether you have done according to reason. They will tell you, I say, whether it is lawful for a Christian man to lay down burden of obedience before his death, when Christ was made obedient to the Father even unto death. You will reply, I have acted by license, asked and received from the bishop. True, you have, indeed, asked for license, but in a manner you ought not to have done, and therefore have rather extorted than asked it. But an extorted or compelled license should rather be called violence. That, therefore, the bishop did unwillingly, when overcome by your importunity, was not to release you from your obligation, but violently to break them. You may indeed be congratulated, since you are thus exonerated. But I fear lest you have, as much as lieth in you, taken from the glory of God, whose will you, beyond doubt, resist in casting yourself down from the post which he had advanced to you. Perhaps you excuse yourself by pleading the necessity of religious poverty, but it is necessity that brings the crown in rendering the achievements difficult and almost impossible. For all things are possible to him who has faith. But answer to me what is most true, that you have consulted your own quiet, rather than the advantage of others. Nor is this strange. I confess that I, too, am pleased that quiet should delight you, if only does not delight you too much. For that, even though a great thing, which pleases us to such a degree that we wish to bring it about, even though by strong means, pleases us much, and because we cannot be brought about by right means, it ceases to be good. For if you offer rightly, but do not divide rightly, you have sinned. Genesis 5:7-70. Either, therefore, you ought not to have accepted the cure of the Lord's flock, or, having accepted it, ought not to have relinquished it, according to those words, Art thou bound unto a wife? Seek not to be loosed. 2 Corinthians 7:27. But to what end do I strive in these arguments? To persuade you to take your charge again? You cannot, since it is no longer vacant. Or to drive you to despair by fixing upon you the blame of a fault which you are no longer able to repair. By no means. I wish only that you should not neglect the fault you have committed, as if it were nothing nor nothing much, but that you should rather repent of it with fear and trembling, as it is written, Happy is the man that feareth always. Proverbs 28:14. But the fear which I wish to inspire is not that which falls into the nets of desperation, but which brings to us the hope of blessedness. There is, indeed, a fear, a useless, gloomy, and cruel, which does not seek pardon, and therefore does not obtain it. There is also a fear, humble, pious, and fruitful, which easily obtains mercy for a sinner, however great be his offense. Such a fear produces, nourishes, and preserves not only humanity, but also sweetness, patience, and forbearance. Who does not so blameless an offspring delight? But of the other, fear the miserable progeny as obstinacy, excessive sorrow, rancor, horror, contempt, and desperation. I have wished to recall you the resemblance of your fault, but only in order to awaken you, not the fear which produces desperation, but that which produces hope, being afraid lest you should not have any fear at all, nor should have too little. There is something, however, which I fear still more for you, namely that which written of certain sinners, that they rejoice in having done evil and delight in wicked actions, Proverbs 2:14. That you should be deceived, and not only think that what you have done is not wrong, but also, which God forbid, glory in your heart, thinking that you have done something great, which is usually done by a few, in renouncing voluntarily the power to command others, despising rule, having preferred to be subjected again to a ruler. That would be a false humility, causing real pride in the heart of him that should think such thoughts. For what can be more profound than to ascribe to spontaneous and, as it were, free choice, which the force of necessity or faint-hearted weakness obliges us to do? But if you have not been forced by necessity or exhausted by labor, but have done it willingly, there is nothing more proud than this. For you have put your own will before that of God. You have chosen to taste the sweetness of repose rather than serve diligently in the work to which he has set you. If, then, you have only despised God, but glory in utterly condemning him, your glorying is not good. Beware of boastfulness and self-satisfaction, more useful for you if it were always in care, always humbling, trembling, not, as I have said, with a fear that provokes wrath, but with that which softens it. If that horrible fear ever knocks at the door of your soul to terrify it, and to suggest that your service to God cannot be accepted, and that your penitence is unfruitful because that in which God has been offended by you, you cannot be amended, do not receive it even for a moment, but reply with confidence, I have done wrong indeed, but it is done and cannot be undone. Who knows if God has foreseen what good should come to me out of this? That he who is good has willed me good even from my evil. Let him then punish the evil which I have done, but let the good which he had provided for remain. The goodness of God knew how to use our ill-governed wills and actions and the beauty of the order which he established, and often in his goodness, even to our benefit. O indulgent bounty of divine love towards the sons of Adam, which does not cease to load us with benefits, not only where no merit was found, but often even where entire demerit was seen. But let us return to you. According to the two kinds of fear which are distinguished above, I wish to you fear and yet not to fear, to presume and yet not to presume. You feel that you may repent, not to feel that you have confidence, and again to have confidence that you may not distrust, and not to be confident that you may not grow inactive. You perceive, brother, how much confidence I have in you, since I permit myself to blame you so sharply, to judge and disprove so freely what you have done, when perhaps you had better reasons for doing it than have hitherto been known to me. For you have not perhaps wished to state those reasons in your letters, by which your action might well be excused, either through your humility or through want of space, leaving, then, undecided for the present my opinion about any part of the matter with which I may not fully acquainted. One thing that you have done I unreservedly praise, namely, that when you had laid down the yoke of ruling, yet without a yoke you were not willing to continue, but took it up again, a discipline which you were attached, without being ashamed to become a simple disciple, when you had borne the title of master. For you were able, when freed from your pastoral charge, to remain under your own authority, since in becoming abbot you were released from your obedience you owed to your former abbot. But you did not wish to be under no authority but your own, and as you had declined to rule over others, so you shrunk from rule over yourself, in as much as you thought yourself not fit to be the master of others. So also you did not trust yourself to be your own master, and in your distrust of yourself, even for your own guidance, would not be your own disciple. And rightly, for he who makes himself his own master subjects to a fool as a master. I know not what others may think of this. As for me, I have had experience of what I say, for it is far more easy and safe to govern many others than my own single self. It was, therefore, a proof of prudent humility, and of humble prudence that, by no means believing that you were sufficient for your own salvation, you proposed to live henceforth by the judgment of another person. I praise you also that you did not seek out another master, nor another place, but returned to the cloister which you had gone forth, and to the master under whom you had made progress is in good. But it was very right in that house which had nurtured you, but had sent you forth through brotherly charity, should receive you when you freed from your charge, rather than that another house should have in its place the joy of possessing you. As, however, you have not maintained the sanction of the bishop for what you have done, do not be negligent in seeking it, but either yourself or through some third person, be prompt to give him satisfaction as far as it is in your power. After this, study to lead a simple life among your brethren, devoted to God, submissive to your superior, respectful towards the older monks, and obliging yourself towards the younger. Be profitable in word, humble in heart, pleasing to the angel, courteous to all. But beware of thinking that you have a right to be honored more than others because you were once placed in a position of dignity. But show yourself as one among the rest, only more humble than all. For it is not becoming that you should be honored on account of a post, the labor of which you have shunned. Another danger also may arise from this, of which I wish to forewarn you and strengthen you against it. For as we are very changeable, and it frequently happens that what we wished for yesterday, today we refuse, and what we shrink from today, tomorrow we desire, so it may happen sometimes by the temptation of the devil from the remembrance of the honor you have resigned. A selfish desire may knock at the door of your heart, and you may begin weakly to covet what you have bravely resigned. The recollection of things which before were bitter to you will then be sweet. The dignity of the position, the care of the house, and the administration of its property, the respectful obedience of domestics, the freedom of your own actions, the power over others, it may be as much a source of regret to you that you have given up on these things, as it was before of weariness to bear them. If you yield even for an hour, which may God forbid, to this most injurious temptation, you will suffer great loss to your spiritual life. This is the whole of the wisdom of that most accomplished and eloquent doctor, by whom you have wished to be taught from such a distance. This is the eulogy, desired and waited for, which you have been so eager to hear. This is the sum of all my wisdom. Do not look for any other great thing from me. You have heard all. What can you require more? The fountain is drained, and you would seek water from the dry sand. I have sent you, according to the example of the widow in the gospel, out of my poverty all that I had. Why art thou ashamed? Why does thy countenance fall? You have obliged me. You have asked for a discourse. A discourse you have. A discourse, I say, long enough indeed, but saying nothing, full of words, empty of meaning. Such is the discourse which ought to be received by you with charity, as you have requested it, but which only seems to reveal my lack of knowledge. Perhaps it would not be impossible for me to find excuses for it. Thus I might say that I have dictated it while laboring under a tertian fever, also while occupied with cares of my office, while it is yet written, write at leisure of wisdom. I should rightly put these actions forward if I had adventured upon some great or laborious work, but now in such a brief treatise that my engagements afford me no excuse. I can allege nothing, as I have often said already, but the insufficiency of my knowledge. But I console myself in my mortifications by considering that if I had not done as you requested, if I had not sent what you hoped for, you would have been quite sure of my goodwill today. I hope that my good intention will content you when you see that the power to do more was wanting to me. Although my letter be without utility to you, it will profit me in promoting humility. Even a fool, when he holdeth his peace, is counted wise. Proverbs 17:28. For that he holds his peace is counted to him as the reserve of humility, not as want of sense. If, then, I still had kept silence, I should have had the benefit of a similar judgment, and have been called wise without being so. But now some will ridicule me as a man of little wisdom. Some laugh at me as ignorant, and others indignantly accuse me of presumption. Do not think that all this deserves little to the profit of religion, since humility, which humiliation teaches us to practice, is the foundation of the entire spiritual fabric. Thus, humiliation is the way to humility, as patience to peace, as reading is to knowledge. If you long for the virtue of humility, you must not flee from the way of humiliation, for if you do not allow yourself to be humiliated, you cannot attain to humility. It is a benefit to me, therefore, that my ignorance should be made known, and that I should be rightly put to confusion by those who are instructed, since I have often been undeservedly praised by those who could not form a correct opinion. Fear of the apostle makes me fear when he says, I forbear, lest any man should think of me above that which he seeth me to be, or that he heareth of me. 2 Corinthians 12:6. How finely he has said, I spare, restrain you. The arrogant, the proud, the desirous of vainglory, the boaster of his own deeds, who either takes merit to himself for what he has done or even claims that he has not done, he does not restrain himself. He alone who is truly humble, he restrains his own soul, who is even afraid to let the excellency that is in him be known, that he may not be thought to be what he is not. Great in truth is the danger, that anyone should speak of us above what we feel our desert to be. Who shall give me to be as deservedly humiliated among men for well-founded reasons as I have been undeservedly praised for ill-founded ones? I should, then, be able to take myself to the word of the prophet. After having been exalted, I have been cast down and filled with confusion. And this I will play, and yet be more vile. 2 Samuel 6:21-22. Yes, I will play this foolish game, that I may be ridiculed. It is a good folly, at which Michael is angry and God is pleased. A good folly which affords a ridiculous spectacle, indeed, to men, but to angels an admirable one. Yes, I repeat, an excellent folly, by which we are exposed to disgrace from the rich and disdain from the proud. For, in truth, what do we appear to people of the world who do except indulge in folly, since what they seek with eagerness in this world we, on the contrary, shun, what they avoid we eagerly seek. Upon the eyes of all we produce the effects of jugglers and tumblers, who stand or walk on their hands, contrary to human nature, with their heads downward and feet in the air. But our foolish game has nothing boyish in it, nothing but the spectacle at the theater, which presents low actions with an effeminate and corrupt gestures, and bendings provoke the passion. But it is cheerful, honorable, grave, decent, and capable of delighting even the celestial beings who gaze upon it. This was he was engaged in, who said, "We are made a spectacle to angels and to men." 1 Corinthians 4:9. May it be ours also in the meantime that we may be ridiculed, confounded, humiliated, until he shall come to who puts down the powerful and exalts the humble, to fill us with joy and glory, and to raise us up forever and ever.